On Wednesday, just one day after people waited for hours in line to cast their ballots in the Wisconsin primary, Bernie Sanders has announced that his campaign is officially over. Bernie will not be the Democratic nominee. Bernie Sanders will not be the president of the United States. Now, this should come as a shock to absolutely nobody because realistically, Bernie Sanders' campaign has been completely over and done with ever since Super Tuesday, when he got completely massacred by Joe Biden in the overwhelming majority of states. And even in the states that Bernie Sanders managed to win, that he managed to edge out over Joe Biden consistently overperformed. From this point onward, it was absolutely a certainty that Bernie Sanders had no chance of winning the Democratic nomination, yet he decided to press onward even after the following week, where he lost in Florida, Michigan, and Arizona by huge margins. But finally, after Wisconsin, it became obvious to even Bernie Sanders that just like all the socialist nations that he aspires the United States to become, it's just not gonna work. Now, I've been covering this primary consistently on this channel for well over a year, and if you've been following my coverage and analysis of these primaries and following my predictions, none of this should have surprised you because I basically predicted that all of this would happen from day one. But I want to break down some of the mistakes made by the Sanders campaign and what actually caused him to lose. Because right now you have a lot of Bernie Sanders supporters that are really angry, and that anger is clouding their judgment. And it's that clouded judgment that prevented them from seeing what was obviously in the cards for them going forward into this primary. So what do I mean by that? Well, the number one reason that the Bernie Sanders 2020 Democratic primary campaign ended up failing is because the Bernie Sanders 2020 Democratic primary campaign learned none of the lessons that they needed to learn from the 2016 Bernie Sanders Democratic primary campaign. You see, there's this narrative that Bernie Sanders' campaign and his supporters, and maybe Bernie Sanders himself, seem to have bought into, and that is that the trickery of the DNC during the 2016 primary was the key factor in why Bernie Sanders lost the 2016 primary to Hillary Clinton. That is not the case, as I've been saying time and time again in all of my videos covering this primary election. The Sanders followers failed to acknowledge that Hillary Clinton got 3.5 million more votes than Bernie Sanders did during that 2016 Democratic primary. And the reason she got 3.5 million more votes than Bernie Sanders was not due to DNC trickery. It was due to the fact that Hillary Clinton appealed to Black Southern Democratic primary voters. I know I've said this a million times on this channel, but that was clearly Bernie Sanders' number one weakness in 2016, yet Bernie's 2020 campaign did not learn that lesson, so Bernie did virtually nothing over the past 4 years to court those voters so that they would get on his side going into 2020. Instead, they put their focus on making rule changes at the DNC under the premise that if Bernie Sanders just would have had a fair chance against Hillary Clinton, if the Democratic primary process was just more fair to Bernie Sanders, he would have walked away with the 2016 nomination, when that is just not the case. Now, to be clear, I'm not denying that Donna Brazile, who became a DNC official during the primary process when she was at CNN, was leaking questions, or got caught leaking at least one question from a CNN town hall or debate to Hillary Clinton. That obviously did happen, and Hillary Clinton, by the way, had a terrible answer to that question anyway, despite receiving it in advance. I'm also not denying that the original debate schedule, where there would be only 3 debates and they would be held on holiday weekend nights where people were less likely to watch, was meant to aid Hillary Clinton. I'm also not denying that Hillary Clinton had her people in the DNC, and she was essentially funneling DNC money into her campaign. And while it was unfair for the DNC to do those things to aid Hillary Clinton when they were publicly pledged to be a neutral party, it is completely overstated the impact that that had on the 2016 Democratic primary race. Because when you look at the race objectively, you'll realize that the DNC, even though they were actively trying to rig it for Hillary Clinton, as a lot of people would say, really ended up helping Bernie Sanders more than anyone throughout the 2016 Democratic primary process. Number one, there were virtually no real candidates running in the Democratic primary in 2016 besides Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders. This was because the DNC was so in debt from the Obama years that Hillary Clinton was able to take over the DNC under the promise that she would pay off the debts of the DNC. Because she was discouraging all the other establishment candidates from running in the election, Hillary Clinton was basically trying to run alone and ended up running against Bernie Sanders. and the best possible way to succeed in American politics, if you're anyone besides Bernie Sanders apparently, is to run against Hillary Clinton. And Bernie Sanders' support was greatly inflated by the fact that he was the alternative to Hillary Clinton in the primaries. Number 2, the preliminary debate schedule was in fact changed throughout the primary process, which meant that Bernie Sanders had more opportunities to confront Hillary Clinton on stage and gain media attention in order to boost his name recognition and boost his notoriety. Number 3, there were a lot of caucuses in the Democratic primary, and in fact, Bernie Sanders, when he was making rule changes or proposing rule changes in 2020, fought to keep those caucuses from 2016 because Bernie Sanders, with a more enthusiastic base, consistently overperformed polling in caucus states. Number 3, the long drawn-out process that is the primary season, coupled with the DNC adding extra debates throughout the process, all aided Bernie Sanders in building momentum over time. I've heard it said many times on the internet among the Sanders base that if the primary season was just a little bit longer, then maybe Bernie Sanders could have possibly won. And I'm tempted to agree slightly with that. However, if he doesn't get black supporters, which is something I said in 2016 and something I said leading up into this election, then he would still, in the long run, have no chance at winning either primary season. Also, the clear bias of the DNC, who were too incompetent to be effective at suppressing Bernie Sanders, ended up angering the Sanders base, and that treatment of Hillary Clinton as the presumptive nominee before the primary process even started motivated them throughout to push harder for Bernie. I don't think Bernie Sanders would have done so well in 2016 if he had any other opponent besides Hillary Clinton, and also if they didn't seem like they were talking down to the Sanders supporters and pretending that they were completely irrelevant throughout the process. Now, a couple of you have probably already commented on this video the word superdelegates, because superdelegates is this fancy buzzword amongst the Sanders base that basically eliminates all logical explanations for why Bernie Sanders lost in 2016 just by saying and or typing that word. However, and I will say this once again, Hillary Clinton won the overwhelming majority of delegates. She got 3.5 million more votes than Bernie Sanders during the Democratic primary. The superdelegates did not play a factor. Furthermore, in 2007, when they were doing the 2008 Democratic primary nominations, Hillary Clinton got more superdelegates before that primary started than Barack Obama. And you know what happened when Barack Obama beat Hillary Clinton throughout that primary process? The superdelegates switched over to Obama. Had Bernie Sanders done that, gotten the majority overall, that's what the superdelegates would have ended up doing. The superdelegates are a thing that are designed to prevent somebody from getting the nomination that the Democratic Party bosses don't want to get the nomination, but they have never, in the history of the Democratic Party, made that decision after a primary. They've never chosen somebody who didn't already win in the Democratic primary process. Again, just look at the Democratic 2016 primary map objectively, compare it to the 2020 Democratic primary map, and you'll see that Bernie Sanders made no inroads in the place where Hillary was strongest and he was weakest. Biden was strong in all of the same places as Hillary Clinton, and Bernie should have known that, and thus done something to counteract that. I didn't see Bernie campaigning a lot in South Carolina. Joe Biden said South Carolina was his wall. That's where he would make his stand. That's why throughout this Democratic primary process, no matter how far in the polls Joe Biden fell, no matter which candidates rose up to first place, I always said as long as Biden doesn't lose any black support and he wins in South Carolina, it is over after South Carolina, and that proved to be true. Now, the second most important factor that damaged Bernie Sanders throughout this Democratic 2020 campaign were his policies and the overconfidence in those policies' popularity. Now, this was driven due in large part by the progressive media and by the mainstream media not delving into the numbers related to Bernie Sanders' policies. Now, I've done 2 videos specifically on the popularity of Medicare for All, both in the country as a whole and within the Democratic primary, and the conclusion I came to by using the same numbers that are cited by the Bernie Sanders diehards was that when people say that they are in favor of Medicare for All, what they are actually saying is they have no idea what Medicare for All is, but what they think sounds nice is a public option. In one-to-one comparisons, if you actually delve into the numbers, you figure out what people think Medicare for All actually means is a public option. On top of that, the very same polling that all these progressives and Sanders supporters keep citing as proof that Medicare for All is a no-brainer, the popular position, not just within the Democratic Party, but within the country as a whole, show that all of the attacks that you've seen on stage are insanely effective against Medicare for All. Sure, you can get some positive polling numbers if you just take the headline number about whether or not people approve of Medicare for All, but when you delve into the details, you talk about raising taxes, you talk about abolishing private insurance, the numbers for Medicare for All completely tank. That's why the candidates who oppose Bernie Sanders kept using those attacks against Bernie Sanders, because they worked. And finally, there's Bernie Sanders himself. And I know the Sanders people who are watching this video likely already clicked off of this video when I talked about his failed strategy and how the DNC thing is not the determinant factor in the 2016 Democratic primary process. I hate to break it to those of you who are still watching this video, but Bernie Sanders is a terrible candidate, and he made mistake after mistake after mistake throughout this campaign and didn't realize it. The guy basically shot himself in the foot over and over again throughout this race, and then wondered why there were bloody footprints trailing him everywhere he went. First off, there's Elizabeth Warren. How Bernie Sanders and his supporters did not recognize Elizabeth Warren as the snake that she is when she spent her entire political career lying about her history in order to advance that political career is beyond me. Look, I said after Super Tuesday, when Elizabeth Warren finished third in her home state of Massachusetts, and she was signaling that she was going to remain in the Democratic primary race, despite the fact that losing your home state is seen as a political embarrassment, that Elizabeth Warren was angling for a VP position, and she wasn't going to endorse Sanders because she was angling for Joe Biden's VP position. And now all of a sudden, after Joe Biden appears to have locked up the Democratic nomination, you start to see the establishment signal boosting Elizabeth Warren, Joe Biden specifically, and Barack Obama specifically. Why are they highlighting Elizabeth Warren, who used to be considered a progressive firebrand that was too progressive for both Joe Biden and Barack Obama? Because obviously Elizabeth Warren cut a deal with Joe Biden. The fact that Bernie Sanders wasn't politically savvy enough to recognize an upjumper, and instead of cutting a deal with Warren or pushing Warren down early, he ended up signal boosting Warren only for her to undermine him later, just shows political weakness and not very savvy attitude on Bernie Sanders' part. I mean, think about it. Throughout the 2020 Democratic primary campaign, Bernie Sanders didn't really attack Elizabeth Warren once. This was despite the fact that Elizabeth Warren, at points during this process, was polling higher than Bernie Sanders, with Bernie Sanders' own agenda. Now, this was reportedly due to the fact that both the candidates had a meeting when they both realized that they were running for president, and there they agreed not to attack one another. But if you were that close that you could make that agreement before you started your primary election, how do you not contact the Warren campaign or Senator Elizabeth Warren when it looks like you're going to be the only progressive candidate that goes against Joe Biden, and make it clear that if she backs you, you're going to make her your VP pick? Him not doing that and not making that clear to Elizabeth Warren left Elizabeth Warren, who again consistently is proven to be an upjumper. If you're a YouTuber, you would call this a clout chaser, to make a deal with the Joe Biden campaign, and that appears to be what has happened. If Warren is the VP, by the way, this will be yet another video that I refer back to, along with my other video where I mentioned Warren being the VP, to claim victory and point out how right I was. But it's not just the Warren thing that shows that Bernie Sanders is not a savvy political thinker. The fact that this man thought it would be a good idea to praise Fidel Castro and communist Cuba going into the Florida primary shows that this guy does not have any sense of politics whatsoever. Now, I know people are going to say, but Obama said the same thing when he was in Cuba. Number one, Obama was already the president, and he had recently ended the embargo against Cuba. Him minimally praising Cuba in the country of Cuba as a diplomatic strategy is not the same thing as Bernie Sanders, the candidate, praising Cuba before Florida voted in the primary season. Also, Florida's a swing state in the general election. That's not stuff that you want to have on record going into a general election when a lot of people in the Democratic Party are specifically concerned about your electability. Also, this did not happen in a vacuum. Bernie Sanders has been praising Fidel Castro, communist Cuba, and every other communist and socialist dictatorship around the world his entire public life. And if you think it's the same, just go and find me the quote of Barack Obama talking about how he was watching Kennedy and Nixon debate Cuba, and listening to John F. Kennedy made him want to throw up because he was talking about how bad Castro was. That quote does not exist because Barack Obama does not have the same history of overtly praising communist dictatorships that Bernie Sanders has.
But I remember, for some reason or other, being very excited when Fidel Castro made the revolution in Cuba. I was a kid and I remember reading that. And it was just seemed right and appropriate that poor people were rising up against rather ugly rich people. And I remember, again, very distinctly, a very distinct feeling. I was watching the debates. You remember the famous Nixon-Kennedy debates. That was the first time the presidential candidates actually debated. And I was becoming increasingly interested in politics. Didn't know much, but was interested. I remember sitting in the student lounge at our dormitory watching the debate. And at that time, well, we can talk about Cuba now, I was very excited and impressed by the Cuban Revolution. And there was Kennedy and Nixon talking about which particular method they should use about destroying the revolution. And I remember the irony, as we learned the history later on, Kennedy was saying that Nixon was too soft on communism. Let me pick up a point that Rick was making. In Cuba, we should deal firmly with Fidel Castro. And Nixon was playing the role of, hey, you got to be patient. You know, you can't do these things. You got to negotiate. Well, of course, what he was upset about is that secretly they were planning the Bay of Pigs invasion right then. But for security reasons, he couldn't come out and say, we're already planning the destruction of the Cuban Revolution. Don't worry about it. So he was the liberal, and Kennedy was playing the conservative. And actually, you know, when you read novels, people say there's a sick feeling in your stomach. Usually I'm sufficiently unemotional not to be sick, but I actually got up from the room and almost left to puke.
These are not the statements and the choices that an intelligent campaign makes during a primary process, and yet Bernie consistently did so throughout the process and wondered why his campaign ended up blowing up in his face. Also, Bernie's strength, as told to me by every Bernie Sanders supporter, including Bernie Sanders ever, is that Bernie can get out the youth vote. But youth voter turnout was down in a lot of these primary states, even the early ones that Bernie Sanders ended up winning. So if your strength is youth voter turnout, and you're not doing well getting young voters to turn out, then maybe you weren't as strong as you thought you were. Look, Biden is the Democratic nominee, and it is very likely that he will bring Elizabeth Warren along with him as the VP pick in the ultimate act of betrayal against Bernie Sanders. But Bernie Sanders and his supporters have no one to thank for Biden's victory but themselves. They didn't look at the 2016 results in an objective way and work on where they were actually weak. They just assumed that Hillary Clinton cheated them, and if not for the DNC trickery, they would win the Democratic nomination for president, walking away without changing up their campaign. And that's just not the case. And unlike in 2016, where we all knew that Bernie Sanders had one more good presidential run in him, this time, it's over for Sanders permanently. But those are my thoughts. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. If you like this video, you know how to hit the like button. You know how to subscribe for more content. You know my support links are in the description box, as well as my social media links. Why do I tell you this at the end of every video and then tell you what the video is about? Makes no sense. Till next time.